Good morning. It's about 6:15 a.m. on January 6th, 2025. Welcome back to Daily Hawk. I'm Hawk. I'm your host. Today is the 4th anniversary of the insurrection at the United States Capitol, when Donald Trump tried to overturn a free and fair election because he lost, because his ego could not handle the fact that he had lost re-election and that he had lost the 2020 campaign to Joe Biden. And today, the House and the Senate are going to certify his electoral count victory in the 2024 election. And he and his allies have tried to erase and revise the history of what actually took place on January 6th, 2021, and what took place in the months leading up to that day. We all watched it happen on live television. It was not a guided tour. It was not a protest that got out of hand. And so I'm going to read a couple of sections from Jack Smith's superseding indictment against Donald Trump, 4 felony counts, and talk about some of the things that have happened since then. And in light of all of that, discuss our electorate, who in their infinite wisdom, knowing all of the information that they know, decided to re-elect Donald Trump and return him to the White House. But first, typically I do these Daily Hawk videos over on my YouTube page. There's a link in the link tree in my bio, or you can just go to YouTube and type in Hawk Podcasts and our page will pop right up. Also, I put up a new episode of our Hawk Droppings podcast yesterday. You can find that at hawkpodcasts.com, where I talk about the TikTok ban, the closing briefs of the government and ByteDance, TikTok's parent company. That case is set for oral argument this coming Friday, January 10th, in front of the Supreme Court, at the same time that Donald Trump will be appearing in a Manhattan courtroom for sentencing on 34 felony counts that he was convicted of by a jury last May for trying to improperly influence the 2016 election. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He announced in the very early morning hours following Election Day that we were going to win this election. And in fact, we did win this election. And for the next 2 months, defendants spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. Those claims were false, and he knew they were false. Trump was entitled to challenge the election results at the state level in the courts, all of which he did. All of those efforts failed. Rudy Giuliani represented him in 60 or 65 lawsuits. They lost all but one. And the one that they did win in Pennsylvania was on a minuscule issue that had no effect on the outcome of the election results in that state. Donald Trump and his co-conspirators, almost all of them attorneys. Count 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Count 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Count 3, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. Count 4, conspiracy against rights. That last count is his attempt to disenfranchise the 81 million people who voted for Joe Biden. Now, what happened? We all think back. You know, it's like there were Stop the Steal rallies all across the United States. There were people who were fundraising to send buses and planes full of insurrectionists to the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. And the night before, on January 5th, there was a massive protest in D.C. where Alex Jones spoke. Rudy Giuliani spoke, getting the crowd riled up. And then the following morning, there were probably 50,000 people at the Ellipsis right across from the White House when Donald Trump gave his speech. All of his other efforts, the lawsuits, things like that, all of his other efforts had failed. The only thing he had left was to stop the certification of the electoral count at the Capitol on January 6th. And so he had his rally with 50,000-ish people at the Ellipsis. At 1 a.m., the last thing he had left was this pressure campaign on Mike Pence. At 1 a.m. on January 6th, he tweeted, "If Vice President Mike Pence comes through for us, we will win the presidency. Many states want to decertify the mistake they made in certifying incorrect and even fraudulent numbers in a process not approved by their state legislatures, which it must be. Mike can send it back." And at 11:15 a.m. on January 6th, Trump called Mike Pence and again pressured him to reject or return Biden's legitimate electoral votes to the states. Vice President again refused. And immediately after the call, Trump decided that in his public remarks at the Ellipse, he was going to single out Mike Pence. And he was aided in that by Rudy Giuliani and Attorney John Eastman, both of whom also spoke before Trump at the Ellipse. During Trump's remarks at the Ellipse, he said to the crowd, "I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so, because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. States want to revote. The states got defrauded." And before his speech at the Ellipse, Trump noticed there were tens of thousands of people who were outside of the secured area because these people didn't want to go through the metal detectors. And so he instructed his people to get rid of the metal detectors. Those people didn't want to come through the metal detectors because they were armed. They had weapons of all kinds. Trump instructed his people to get rid of the metal detectors and said, "These are my people. They're not here to hurt me." Trump closed out his remarks by saying, "We fight. We fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to march down to the Capitol." He said he was going to go to the Capitol with his people. That obviously didn't happen, and we heard the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson during the January 6th committee hearings as to why that didn't happen. And so the Proud Boys led the charge. Dominic Pizzola was the first person to smash his way through a window. He was a senior member of the Proud Boys. He's in prison. And it was so at 1:30 p.m., Trump returned to the White House, settled into the dining room of the Oval Office. At 2:13 p.m., after more than an hour of steady, violent advancement, the crowd at the Capitol broke into the building and forced the Senate to recess. At 2:20 p.m., the official proceeding having been interrupted, staffers evacuating from the Senate carried with them the electoral votes, and the House was also forced to recess. At 2:24 p.m., the defendant personally issued a tweet intended to further delay and obstruct the certification. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent, inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. The USA demands the truth. 1 minute later, at 2:25, the United States Secret Service was forced to evacuate the vice president and his family to a secure location. At the Capitol throughout the afternoon, following that tweet from Trump, members of the crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence. Where is Pence? Bring him out. Traitor Pence." The attack on the Capitol, Trump didn't issue his little video telling people to go home until almost 3 hours after the Capitol had been broken into by Trump supporters who destroyed property and shit in their hands and smeared their own fecal matter on the walls. The electoral count was delayed for several hours and was not completed until 3:41 a.m. on January 6th. And Donald Trump was indicted for that. Donald Trump was in office for 2 more weeks, he could have pardoned all of those people during that 2-week period, including all of his co-conspirators, all of the insurrectionists. He did not do that because he is a transactional person. And those people didn't uphold their part of the transaction. What they did not work. He did not retain power. And Donald Trump does not reward failure. And so he left office on January 20th. The only reason, let's come back around to the electorate, the only reason that this worked is because Donald Trump is keenly aware that his supporters are dumb and gullible. And they were dumb enough and gullible enough to believe his relentless lies that the 2020 election was stolen. And now a couple thousand of them have been arrested and charged with various crimes, including felonies. And somewhere around 800 of them have been sentenced to prison because they believed his lies, which he knew were lies. And he knew they were dumb enough to believe his lies. And they did. And now, so then he leaves office on January 20th, 2021. He walks out to his helicopter and goes home. And about 1.5 years after that, 2 years after that, he gets indicted in Manhattan. He gets indicted in Fulton County, Georgia. He gets indicted in Southern Florida for stealing classified documents and obstruction. And he gets indicted in Washington, D.C. for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. But he's also running for president again. He employs every delay tactic known to mankind. And then in July of this year, the United States Supreme Court issued its immunity decision. The 5 conservative men on the court, if you listen to oral argument, they were more offended by anything, the fact that Donald Trump was being prosecuted at all, as opposed to what Donald Trump had done, as described in that indictment. And immediately prior to the Supreme Court issuing that decision, Donald Trump stood trial in Manhattan and was convicted on 34 felony counts, for which he's going to be sentenced this coming Friday, January 10th, 10 days before he is inaugurated. Knowing all of this information, the American electorate, in all of its wisdom, decided to send him back to the White House for a second time, squashing all of the criminal cases against him and sending him back a second time with basically full immunity from criminal prosecution, courtesy of his United States Supreme Court in its current iteration. And why did the American public do this? Because a majority of our electorate are incredibly stupid and selfish. And we're more concerned about the cost of gasoline, milk, and eggs than they are about preserving anything resembling democratic rule in the United States of America. And so now we've got incoming FBI Director Kash Patel, who believes that the FBI incited the insurrection at the United States Capitol 4 years ago today. There's no evidence of that. The FBI Inspector General issued a report within the last week or two saying that there were no FBI agents on scene at the Capitol that day, undercover or otherwise. And, you know, and during the campaign that took place leading up to this past election, the 2024 election, first of all, a huge amount of blame for where we are today rests squarely on Joe Biden's shoulders for announcing following the 2022 midterms that he was going to run for re-election, and spending 1.5 years doing that until we all saw the debate between him and Trump. And then he dropped out a little less than a month later, giving Kamala Harris less than 110 days to campaign for the presidency. At which point, Donald Trump switched to an explicitly, unapologetically racist, misogynist, bigoted, transphobic presidential campaign, feeding on the worst components of racism and misogyny in our society and in our culture. But it worked. That campaign worked. Donald Trump won re-election, and now 2 weeks from today is going to be inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States. Also during 2020, leading up to the 2020 election, we had the COVID pandemic. And now we're staring down bird flu, which from what I understand is 1 or 2 mutations away from human-to-human transmission. And it is a respiratory tract infection, disease, with a dramatically higher fatality rate than COVID ever could have hoped to achieve. So if it's human-to-human transmission, is respiratory, involving masks and social distancing, which Republicans and MAGA and people on the right are already saying they are not going to do if we have a second pandemic. And the 2 people, if they're approved by the Senate, who are going to be in charge of our response to the bird flu pandemic are going to be RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz. And I didn't even cover the fact that the general public was fully aware that Donald Trump had been adjudicated as a rapist by the judge in the E. Jean Carroll case, writing in a post-trial order that E. Jean Carroll had proved at trial that Donald Trump had raped her. This was a heavy weekend for me leading up to today, and thinking back on the last 4 years and thinking back on the last several months. I don't like coming on here with pessimism day after day after day. I don't have any short-term optimism for this country. That's a terrible feeling. But I feel like I need to be realistic about where things are as well. And realistically, our prospects in the near future are bad. They are very, very bad. Even if we do manage to dodge a bullet with bird flu, our short-term prospects are incredibly bad. Trump wants to begin mass deportations in 2 weeks, along with all of the other horrific policy agenda items that he wants to implement within his first 100 days. Fortunately, he is going to be hobbled by a nearly non-functioning House of Representatives that, if he gets all of his cabinet picks, is going to have a 217 to 215 margin, and a near inability to get literally anything done. That's one bright spot I've been able to find. But thinking back to 2020 and COVID, one of the things that assisted me tremendously during that period of time was getting onto TikTok and finding people like Laughter and Light, a scientist, an immunologist who educated me a lot about what we were actually dealing with. And 13 days from today, there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to take TikTok away from us too. So we're all going to be flying blind through the next 4 years. in really, really bad circumstances. So I wish I felt better about our future. I wish I had better news for you guys. I wish we weren't surrounded by so many gobsmackingly stupid people who vote, but we are. Anyway, be safe this week, and I'll see you guys soon. Please follow the link in my link tree to our YouTube page, because less than 2 weeks from now, I don't think TikTok's going to be here anymore.